Welcome to Mostly Minutia. I'm Colleen Lindell. This is episode 27, Happy Pride, Road to Authenticity. So one of my favorite questions I get asked frequently is, how do I find the guests for my show? And I always say, oh, they're just people I've met, which is 100% true. Everyone on this show is someone I've met in real life, and it's usually through a very normal meeting. I either met them at work, on set, or at a restaurant, or I read an article on them in the Los Angeles magazine and then pursued them like crazy because they were irresistible, which was the case with Loretta Owens, the perfume spritzer I interviewed from episode 23. But today's episode, I think, has been the strangest way of meeting one of my guests to date. And let's just be clear, I do feel like the meeting of my guests is divinely purposed because there's no way I could plan for some of these. So today's episode is about Chris Chism. Chris is the Assistant Director of Music and Worship at Cathedral of Hope Church in Dallas. And Cathedral of Hope is known as the largest gay church in the world. Today's episode is on Chris and his coming out story, which is a story that spans 31 years of what Chris calls the road to his authentic true self. This is the second story in a series of 3 coming out stories in honor of Happy Pride. And Chris and I, we met in a hot tub in Puerto Rico while he was on his honeymoon with his wonderful and very witty husband, Thomas. And I don't know how much more I should say about this because I don't know how many details you actually want to hear. But basically, I was in Puerto Rico working on a TV show. I've mentioned before I'm a camera assistant. And I had a very steady routine of every day after shooting for 10 hours a day, I would go down to the pool, float in the pool for about 15 to 20 minutes, watch the stars, and then slowly saunter over to the hot tub where I would soak for an additional 15 to 20 minutes. It was a very steady routine. It just so happened that one night I was in my hotel room. I didn't feel like soaking in the pool, but I did want to go in the hot tub. And I could see from my room that there were people in the hot tub. And usually if there were people, that was like a major avoidance for me, being a single female. So I could see there were 4 people in the hot tub, 3 guys and 1 girl, and I immediately judged them and thought, frat party. But a voice inside me told me not to be intimidated, that I should just go, that I wouldn't regret it, and that there was someone there specifically for me to meet. So I walk down, I get in the hot tub, but I move as far away from the other 4 people as possible, because at this point, I'm really standoffish. And even though those voices told me everything's going to be okay, and even though I love meeting people, I still am not totally trusting. So I go far, far away from everyone else, and then one person from the group swims over to me, introduces himself, and this person happens to be Chris. And I soon find out that not only is Chris there on his honeymoon, but that the other guy and girl are there on their honeymoon as well. And then we all start talking, and Chris shares with me a little about his coming out story. I tell him about the series I'm doing, and he immediately says he wants to be involved, and here we are. And I have to say, I loved doing this interview with Chris. He is so well-spoken. He allows himself to be vulnerable. He's very honest. And so talking with him was very refreshing for me. We did do this via Skype, and I want to apologize beforehand for a few very mosaic Skypey sounds. It was my first time interviewing using Skype, and I'm still trying to figure out the best way of doing phone interviews. Also, you will hear sounds of birds in the background, and that's because I was so hyper nervous about getting a good signal for this interview that I was camping out pretty much next to the modem in a room with a lot of windows, and so you can hear the birds outside, which in itself was kind of a dream realized for me because lately I've been fantasizing about doing more interviews outside to have more atmospheric sounds. Anyway, enjoy Chris' story. This is episode 27, Road to Authenticity. Our brief time of meeting in the hot tub, you had explained to me a little bit about your story, which I loved. And thank you so much for even sharing it with me when we were sitting there, because I know it's like you're just meeting a stranger. And then you started sharing your story, but it was so compelling. And I'm trying to share people's coming out stories with listeners so that maybe it could help somebody.
Yeah.
So you had said that you wanted to share your story, and I'm kind of thinking maybe we should just start like in the beginnings where you can share where you came from, the kind of family you grew up in, so that listeners can understand your background?
Well, that could take a good 40 minutes. No. So, I grew up in Dallas, Texas, and since I was a child, I always was involved in church, and I was kind of the one who got my family going to church in the first place. I would go on a bus. They would come pick us up at the apartment complex, and then my parents started going, and it's a Pentecostal church, very strict Pentecostal church. And my parents started going, and it really changed our whole family's life. Like my dad was an alcoholic before we started going to church, and then started going and cleaned up, and they got really, really invested in the church. And in any crowd I was in, I was always like the church boy, and would go to camp in the summertime. And
How did you start? I know you said you were going on a bus, but how did you even, who introduced you to going to church?
so it was actually my friend from kindergarten, and her mom was like the bus captain or the bus driver lady. And so they would come pick up kids in apartment complexes and just take them to church. And it was funny because there were two different churches that would come by our apartments. One was this huge, massive, non-denominational church, and then one was the church that I started going to. And I originally started going to the non-denominational church because they had better snacks. But my friend Becky went to the other church, and so I started going with her. And soon after, my parents started going, and my little brother and sister, and so it just became like a family thing. And I was kind of like the family leader pretty much throughout my life until I came out.
And your parents, how did they meet?
My parents met in high school, and my mom had me when she was 17,
Hmm.
and my dad was black. My dad is black, and so when she was pregnant with me, she was told to either get rid of me or leave. And so she moved in with my great grandma and decided to have me the middle of her senior year of high school. And I was born, and we lived with my grandma for 2 years because my dad was in the army, and then he came back, and they were pretty much together after that.
Wow.
I mean, so from the get go, like my family and life was pretty crazy.
I mean, they were, it sounds like they were just making something out of nothing, you know?
Yeah, my mom finished high school. Like she would take me to daycare and then go to school, and like finished high school and graduated on time with everybody else, and
Wow.
had me in November of her senior year.
Wow. When your parents, finally got back together for the long haul, you
Hmm.
said that you had siblings. Did they come right away?
Sister was 5 years later, and then my brother was the year after that. They were back to back.
Okay. What are their names?
RV and Amanda.
That's
And
cute.
yeah, and so my little brother is actually named after my dad, even though he was the second son born, because there was no way my mom was going to name me after my dad whenever things were so crazy back in the day. So,
What was like around you? What was it like growing up around you? The school you went to and like the environment in general. Was it pretty supportive of you as a person?
I think through elementary and junior high, as far as money is concerned, like I got free lunch, and I didn't realize that I got free lunch because our parents didn't have money. I thought, I just got free lunch because I was the cool kid who got free lunch. But I was on a, program for the kids who couldn't afford lunch.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to a school that was predominantly Hispanic, and I didn't really fit in with the white kids uh, because I wasn't white enough. I didn't really fit in with the black kids because I wasn't black enough. And so I usually hung out with the Hispanic kids.
That's amazing, isn't it? That people say, okay, you're not black enough or you're not white
Yeah,
enough. It's like, when am I enough?
exactly, exactly. And probably until high school. In high school, I finally found my place and got involved in music program, and that really was kind of like my first life changing event that made me feel okay. I belong here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because like I hated going to school in elementary and junior high. Those were really like hard years, just trying to fit in and find my place. And there was a lot of drama in my family in my early elementary years before they started going to church and stuff.
Is that because of the alcoholism?
I think that had a lot to do with it.
I'll just say for the record, there was alcoholism in my family too. And as a child growing up in that, it like scared the shit out of me. It would just
Yeah,
make me
yeah,
always feel not secure, not taken care of. It's
right.
no longer happening in our family, but it was a huge thing growing up. Yeah.
So I think that has a lot to do with why my faith in God was so strong as a child, because I literally saw my family go from this hot mess situation to everybody kind of getting on the right track, what felt more stable. Um, but with that, there was an unhealthy codependency that came with that, kind of giving the church credit for everything. And so then that made you not want to disappoint the church. So everything came down to being a people pleaser and making sure that you did all these different things correctly for the church or the pastor.
Yeah, yeah. It's weird. Alcoholism's weird because it's like it's not the root of the problem. So it's like you take that away and then it gets replaced with some sort of extremism of some sort, I think.
Yeah. To fast forward a little bit, when I was 21, I left that church that I grew up in because I had gone off to college for a year and then came back, and my eyes were open to the real world. And that really affected my whole family because that's where we had gone for the last 10 years. And
Right.
when I left, they were treated differently. And so then they stopped going. And it was almost instantaneous that when they stopped going, dad started drinking again, mom left dad, and the whole family was just like in a million directions.
Oh.
That was 20 years old. And then brother and sister are in eighth and ninth grade. And so then once again, I'm feeling like, oh, how am I going to hold all this together?
Yeah.
Not to mention wrestling with all of my own secrets and stuff that I was already dealing with at that time, trying to figure out how the heck to navigate through all that.
That's a lot of weight to bear. Um, when did you know that you were gay? Do you remember having thoughts or being attracted to men growing up?
Oh, totally. Yeah. So I was pretty young. I remember getting caught by the next door neighbor's grandmother kissing the next door neighbor kid at like 8 years old. And I begged her not to tell my great grandma about it because they like live next door to each other, and so like she never told. But I started some of those having some of those situations and stuff happening with other guys probably in junior high, if I'm to be honest. But in high school, I was so devoted to trying to please God that I would abstain and abstain. I would look at porn and then go to church and put my hands in the air and ask God to forgive me.
You know, when you were younger and you had these attractions to other guys, what was your feeling on homosexuality then? Did you feel like it was like a sin or?
Oh yeah, we were taught that that was a sin. You did not do that, and I was told on a couple of different occasions that everyone has fleshly desires. What you do with those is up to you. And so I was always able to not call myself gay and just chalk it up to I just like sex.
Yeah, were you attracted to women at all?
I was. I mean, when you're young and you're taught that this other thing is a sin, you want to be attracted to a woman. You want to be normal. And so the attraction wasn't so much that I was attracted to a woman's body as much as it was the attraction to, you know, being normal and being straight and being, on the right side of things.
What did people say about like homosexuality being a choice? Because I know that that was
Yeah,
something that was talked about a lot. Like, oh, this is a choice. You know, people aren't born this way.
totally. Well, and actually, it was that, but it was in most of the circles I was in. No one really denied that people might naturally be attracted to the same sex. It was more what you decide to do with that attraction, and it's a choice whether or not to act upon it. Is the way that it was usually brought to me. As long as you abstain from, fornication or lust, those were the words they used a lot, then you're not in sin. It wasn't a sin to have the attraction, it was a sin to entertain the attraction.
Uh-huh.
And so I dated girls in high school and college, and then at 20 years old, I got really sick. I had a very rare fungal infection that was in my lungs and caused my lymph nodes to get swollen up. And for 4 months, they were trying to figure out what was wrong with me. I was in and out of the hospital. So only thing I can think is, oh my gosh, I've got AIDS and I'm going to die. And I had never even done anything that would typically cause someone to get AIDS. It was just that mental, like, I'm being punished. This is God's punishment for me. And so I promised God, if I was going to be healed, that I would not act upon those desires again. So come to find out, it was just a fungal infection that was very rare. It was treated and all was well. But that was the same year. That was in 2005. I was 20 years old. And that's the same year that my parents split up. That's the same year that I left that church that I grew up in. And I was introduced to my ex-wife. I was introduced to her that same year, like right before I got sick, and lived in Louisiana. We dated long distance for a year. And so as I get better, I'm trying to cling to this family dynamic. And I've already promised God that I'm going to stay straight and stay on this path. And so I proposed to her that November. I'm going to start my family and do this the right way.
Wow. How did you meet her? Like, who introduced you guys?
So in the Pentecostal church, in the organization I grew up in, the community's really small throughout all of Texas and Louisiana and Mississippi, like all the southern states. It's so funny because there's not a whole lot of black people in that organization either. So she was like one of 3 black people in her 3,000 member church in Louisiana. Everybody was just like, she's black and you're half black and you're into music and she wants to marry some kind of music minister because that's what Pentecostal girls do after high school. So we got married that following July, and we realized very quickly that we knew very little about each other.
What kinds of things tipped you off?
So she would always come to visit me. Like once a month I would come visit her. She would come here. And I never knew before we got married that she didn't drive and had not ever gotten a driver's license. She actually told me that she did drive. And then literally like 2 weeks into our marriage, she's like, oh, by the way, I need to go home and get my license because I just have a permit. And I'm like, you what? She's like, well, I've never actually gotten my license. And she just said it casually, like it wasn't a big deal. And I'm like, how do you plan to go to school? How do you plan to get a job and go to work? Like from the get-go, it was one of those things that made me just completely crazy. So for the 5 years that we were together, she never did get her license. Come to find out, like 2 years into our marriage, she told me that she didn't get her license because she was afraid to drive because of an accident she was in as a child. And I'm like, okay, now this comes out. Like, we need counseling, so like we can get to the root of some of all this. But we were both young and immature and trying to make it work.
Now, what about for you personally? What was happening with you?
So in the middle, I guess it was the first 6 months, we got in a huge fight. One of those fights where you say stuff that you don't mean or that you do mean that you can't take back. Like, talk about each other's family, and just some really hurtful stuff was said that made it really hard for me to ever connect to her again. And so it was probably 6 months in that I found myself going back to some of those old habits, looking at porn here and there. And over 5 years, that just continued to snowball into much bigger secrets. I mean, so much to, at one point, a couple of years in, like I totally was just living a double life and found somebody I actually had feelings for. So the first time I ever have like emotional feelings for a guy, I'm married. He came to visit one time and she had gone out of town. I know some people are probably like, how the heck do you have a conscience to do that? Like, how do you justify it? Or whatever. But when you live a lie for so long, you learn how to compartmentalize those things, and it doesn't feel wrong because because you're so numb, because you've literally cut off all of your authentic feelings that matter, and nothing nothing is ever real. She never questioned anything. Like, I would go out of town for a couple of days with friends. She never asked who the friends were. So one day I was with this guy that I had these feelings for, and we're driving down the road. He's like, "You know what your problem is?" He said, "You never even admitted to yourself that you're gay." So you could look at yourself in the mirror right now and still try to tell yourself that you're not gay. You love me, you're married, and you can't even say it out loud. And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "Well, say it out loud. Say I'm gay." And I'm like, "No." I remember exactly where I was at. I was in the parking lot of an AMC theater. And I remember saying the words and bawling my eyes out. And it was like the first time I ever just said the words out loud, "I'm gay." After all these years, at this point, I'm 26 years old. And by that December, I finally had the conversation with her. I wasn't happy being married anymore. Didn't say anything about being gay. And you have to remember also, I worked at a church. I had done, from 20 years old, I had my first church job. And I'm 25 years old working in a 3,000 member church as the music director. So there was the ministry side of it, there was the God side of it, and then there was also, this is my career. The church I was in at the time, super loving people. Everyone there knew that we weren't connected. Like, we lived in the same house. We slept in separate bedrooms half the time. Haven't had sex in almost a year. So it was just like we were putting on a show, and she knew it and I knew it. So I started that conversation in December of 2010, and then 2 days later, my great grandmother died.
Oh.
So that conversation was put on hold because I had to deal with all of that.
Mm-hmm.
So my great grandmother dies, and the first thing I do is hop in my car and drive so I can be comforted by this guy who I was talking to. So I literally find out and drive from Dallas to Houston, which is like a 4.5 hour drive, just so I
Wow.
can like feel some kind of comfort. And I think maybe 2 or 3 people know that. Like, this is like the raw story. So
Hmm.
um, after that, I came back to Dallas, and then in January, I had a really honest conversation with myself about what I needed to do moving forward, because I was tired of living this lie, and it wasn't fair to the guy I was talking to. So in January, I talked to him and told him that I had to break it off completely. That if I was going to move forward and figure out how to be my authentic self, I couldn't do it with this relationship attached to that. Like, I needed to do it on my own, not let it
Mm-hmm.
be, oh, Chris left his wife for some guy in Houston. Broke that off with him. Then I went to my pastor of this church that I work at, and I tell him, I don't tell him I'm gay. I tell him I'm not happy in my marriage and I don't want to live this way forever. He's like, "Well, I know that y'all aren't happy together, and we need to make sure that there's no other options before y'all divorce. You need to go to counseling and try to work things out,
Hmm.
but don't be afraid of losing your job because you're trying to, be honest about things." So that
Hmm.
made it worse, because now I have a pastor who is willing to walk me through getting divorced because he wants me to be authentic. Yet there's no
Hmm.
way I'm telling him I'm gay.
Hmm.
Like, divorce is one thing because the church has progressed enough now to where it's okay to get divorced, but not okay to be gay. And so in May of 2011, I finally had the courage to just be like, "I'm not happy and I don't want to be married anymore." That was like May 31st. It's like Memorial Day weekend. And our lease was about to be up. And that's kind of like in my gut, I know that this is where this has to, be the breaking point.
Yeah.
So the pastor made us go to a weekend retreat, like a couples retreat. he hooked us up with this guy who's like the marriage saver. And if we don't save your marriage this weekend at this retreat, we'll give you your money back. I'm just like, I knew I was, wasting our time. And all this time, like from all this time, I would still be on a hookup site and then delete it, on a hookup site, delete it.
Mm-hmm.
5 days after I told her I wanted a divorce, I was on the site and I met this guy. We hooked up and then ended up talking for 2 hours afterwards. And he's telling me how he's going through a divorce as well. Just moved into his first apartment, has 2 kids. This guy being the person I would be with for the next 4 years.
Wow.
And once again, like, I'm never taking time to figure me out. Like, and he made the process way easier of getting through the divorce process part because I had somebody to lean on. But it also complicated things tremendously, obviously. So June, when I met this guy, to the next February, I still worked at the church and got deeper and deeper into that double life lie. Me and this guy had the same scenario. He was also still in the closet. We just connected.
Yeah.
But from the get-go, I was super codependent on this person.
Did you feel like you were starved for something when you met him? Like starved for love, or did you just feel like you just needed that support so badly?
I think more than anything, it was the first time things felt normal. Like I had that like long distant relationship with this guy where I would see him every couple of months or whatever, and knew in the back of my head that was never going to work, and I was still married. Well, here I am, like she's moved now. I'm fixing, like I have somewhat of a normal relationship and like someone that I connect with. But I mean, from the get-go, it was toxic. It was emotional manipulation. I wasn't completely honest, and I cheated within like the first 3 months. So for 4 years, I was held captive by the fact that I broke this person's trust. This could be a Lifetime original story right here. Like, he would literally come to church with me as my cycling buddy that we met cycling.
Huh. Okay.
Like, I had like a whole story, like a whole, plot. So he would come to church and he was just, my good friend. And at that point, I was like, something is going to have to give. I was driving myself crazy. Our relationship was getting more and more serious. I was spending every waking moment with him. My friends were like, what the heck's going on? And so I came out to my best friend and his wife. We're having sushi one night, and she's like, something is wrong with you, and I don't know what you're hiding, but it's time just to tell us what it is. I'm like, what are you talking about? She goes, Chris, I know you're gay. Tell us. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, I tried to play it off for a minute, and then I'm like, okay, let's have a shot. And then that was probably the most liberating moment I had had up until then. They're like, we love you. We're going to be here with you through this. And they literally walked with me through that even up until now. They've just been there, the 2 people that were there the whole time.
They sound wonderful.
Yeah, they are.
But how did you feel in that moment? I mean, you said, I mean, that was totally liberating for you, even though it was like difficult to say the words to other people.
Yeah, I mean, like as soon as I actually said it and told them what had gone on, like just the gist of it all, and they were like, okay, now what? Then also like freaking out for me. Like they knew, like, well, what are you going to do? Like, because I worked at a church, like that was my whole life. So February, the week before it all hit the fan, it was Valentine's weekend. The pastor who I've been so close to all this time, he preached a message, and he was talking about the importance of love and the definition of love and how love is between a man and a woman. And he starts on this rant about how God made Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. I'd been there for 2 years, and the 2 years I was at that church, he had never said anything like that. I knew that's what we believed as a congregation, but it was the first time that it like sucker punched me. Because at this point, it's real to me. Like, I'm like, this is happening now. Like, I have to come clean and have to tell the truth. So missed work Monday and Tuesday, and I came to church that Wednesday night. I'm getting ready to, start my music rehearsal. And he comes up to me while I'm on the stage. He's like, "Is there anything you need to talk about? Is everything okay? Something just seems off." And I'm like, "Yeah, we need to have a talk." And he's
Hmm.
like, "Do you want to do it now or after church?" And I'm like, "Let's do it after church." So I literally led the music for the last time, knowing it was my last time to do that. I led that service, stuck around for a little bit. He was talking to people. I literally left. I drove off, freaked out, like, I can't do this. I can't do this. Ended up turning back around, going back to the church. We get in his car, which I don't know why the heck I agreed to take a ride down the road, but we get in the car and he's like, "So tell me what's going on." So I start making stuff up. I'm like, "Well, I finally filed for divorce last week and I've been too afraid to tell you." He's like, "Okay, what else is going on?" So then that's when I'm like, I think the words I used at the time were, "Well, since I was a kid, I've struggled with my sexuality." And you would have thought I told him I was dying.
Huh.
Like, I'm literally telling this pastor, you hired me 2 years ago, and I've lived a lie that contradicts everything y'all believe. For the last 8 months, I've secretly had a relationship with this person who comes to your church. Like, I've told him all this, and his whole thing is, if you want help, we'll help you. You can be healed. In his mind, I could be fixed, or that I needed to be fixed.
But were
Uh,
you asking to be fixed? Were you asking for help?
no, I was saying I'm at the point where I can't live this lie anymore, and I've tried to pray it away. I've gone without food, thinking that if I fast long enough, I can. There were so many different things that I tried over the 27 years of my life at this point, and I said I'm tired of being in this closet, because this closet has led me to do things that no normal person would do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he got one of his friends on the phone that was a preacher who struggles with homosexuality but is married and has 3 kids, and got this
Mm.
guy on the phone to talk to me about how there was healing and help, and I'm always going to have these feelings, and he still considers himself gay, but he abstains from living that lifestyle. And I'm like, "So you mean to tell me I'm supposed to stay married or get married and have a wife that never feels like she's good enough? Or I'm supposed to stay celibate and single and never find true happiness or never find anyone to be connected to?" I was like, "If that's the God you serve, I don't want to serve that God anymore." So I ended up writing a letter, which I still have, and basically just said, "I've done this for too long and I can't do it anymore." And he was understanding, still send me a text message and check on me, just how you doing or whatever, which is so weird because I'm totally against churches who preach that message that tells people that they're going to hell, because literally parents are kicking their kids out of their home because their kid's gay and they feel like they have sin in their house, or kids
Mm-hmm.
are committing suicide because they don't feel worthy of God's love. And so there's
Yeah.
this tension and frustration and that part of me that is like, this has to be addressed and stopped.
Right. It makes me almost think that they're like on their journey too.
Oh yeah.
Like they're have evolving opinions maybe or evolving thought about it.
My mom, when I came out to her, she was devastated. She's like, "What are you going to do now?" And I told her about the guy I was dating at the time, and she's just like, "So you're giving up your whole life for this guy?" And I'm like, "No, I'm giving up this life because this is who I am, and that life doesn't accept me for that." And then that led me into 3.5 more years of this very unhealthy relationship with this guy. But he was with me when I started working at the church I work at now, which is the largest LGBT church in the nation. And that was the next part of that journey of authenticity, because we both found each other in a broken place. Neither one of us had any kind of guide point. So by the end of that relationship, it was like it's like kind of like being let out of jail.
Well, you had mentioned before that like 5 days after your divorce, you started dating this guy.
Yeah.
But you said that you never took time to work on you. And so I'm wondering, after you ended this relationship with this person, were you able to start working on yourself or spend time with yourself and figure out some things for you?
I totally was. I would literally schedule nights where I could not be with anyone, like where I couldn't go on a date or I couldn't go out because
Mm-hmm.
it was so easy, especially in our community here. Like they will make a reason to party. And so I would literally say like, okay, this night and this night are my two nights this week where it's just me, or this is my night that I go out by myself and I'm going to date myself.
So you were like guarding time, like cutting out these spaces of time and guarding time for yourself.
Yeah. And it wasn't easy and it wasn't always the case. But another aspect of all that is that brought back a lot of other feelings from when I was married where there's some stuff that I definitely would have done differently. And me and my ex-wife reconciled some years back. But even now, like we don't talk at all and I have lost touch with her, but there's still things that I would like to say, you know what, I didn't consider how I did this and how that must have made you feel. Or I didn't
Hmm.
consider how much this decision affected the rest of your life. And I'm deeply, deeply sorry.
Hmm.
When I was on my own, that was like, oh my God, like I'm having to face me for the first time and figure out how to love me because I would still just date this guy or I feel like in 6 months I probably pissed off 10 or 12 different guys like who probably still talk about me and that Christism, he's just an asshole because he led me on, broke my heart.
But in those times of carving out time for yourself, like what kinds of things do you learn about yourself? Because it is a real miraculous thing to get to spend like hours with ourselves sometimes.
Well, I was single for this stretch of time, but I also felt like there was something wrong with me because now I've been single and I've gone on all these dates and I cannot emotionally connect to anyone. I can flirt and have a good time, but no one was good enough. But I think a lot of that had to do with me feeling like I wasn't good enough. And I still hadn't dealt with those underlining issues from that last relationship, from being married. And so I decided to take a trip. Got out of town one weekend. It was a holiday weekend, and I drove down to Houston. And at this point, I know Thomas. We already know each other, but we're not dating, and I will not let him get close to me at all. I knew he was a good guy, so I was not going to curse him with my with my mess because I knew I was single and I would needed to be single, and I could tell if I was going to talk to him, it was going to be something serious. So I met him at church like right before this trip, actually about a month before this trip, and he was actually one of the ones that really encouraged me to go spend some time alone. And so I go on this trip. I'm like, I'm cutting off Facebook. I'm cutting off all social media. So I lock myself in this hotel room and I have a bottle of wine, which is always a good idea. And I had been listening to Brene Brown podcasts and one of her TED Talks about the power of vulnerability. And I get sticky notes. I go to the dollar store and buy sticky notes and a marker. I start writing down everything that I love about myself. And I put them on this mirror. And then I write down everything that I don't like about myself or that I'm ashamed of. And the things, my positive things were like 4 or 5. And the negative
Mm-hmm.
things like filled up the whole mirror. And so I get through this exercise and I just like bawl my eyes out because I literally wrote down stuff that I didn't want anyone to know about. And the things that I could no longer control, like that I could never reconcile, I literally just took off the wall and just shredded up. If it was something that I could control, like a relationship that needed to be reconciled, like I literally tried to make that happen after that. But
Hmm.
if it was my body issues or my things that were out of my control, that were just things that I didn't like about myself, I literally just said, I'm giving this to God.
Hmm.
And that's kind of where I started to look at even my spirituality differently because I feel like the word sin that we use in the church isn't necessarily about stuff we do wrong as much as it is about how much we punish ourselves and continue a cycle of doing
Hmm.
something that doesn't serve us anymore.
Do you mean, when you say that, do you mean like choosing to live in shackles of some sort when it's like true that we are truly free?
Yeah, because I feel like you're truly free and truly forgiven when you forgive yourself, and whenever you can do things without shame. Because shame is really one of those things that you control. Like there's shame and then there's healthy guilt. Like I did this wrong, it was bad for me, I have a conscience, I'm not going to do that again. Where shame is, I'm going to hold myself captive. Guilt is good. Shame is what makes us continue to live in that pattern of inauthenticity.
Yeah, yeah. So
Sorry, I
when you
got really.
were, no, I totally relate to this. I tend to fall into the line of perfectionism, you know, and it will like keep me in this really weird, bad, weird cycle of self-loathing sometimes. And
Yeah,
since I've gotten older, it kind of is lessened, and I'm like much easier on myself. But
right.
yeah, in the past it was bad where I didn't realize it was me that was being so critical of myself until
Yeah.
I was like, wait a second, there's nobody criticizing me, and it's like my own internal dialogue.
Well, and that's where I lived. That's where I lived for months. I work in a church where there's a couple thousand gay people and straight people as well. It's very mixed now. So I'm always in this kind of spotlight. And then in the community, I do fundraising events and I sing at a bar. And so all these people know me. So I'm always worried about what people think. And I live my life trying to put on this facade to please everyone else all the time. And I always thought about, well, how's that going to affect so and so, or what are they going to think if I do this? And if I post this video, like, is it going to make me seem like I'm, being cocky? There's all these things that all are determined by what someone else thinks. We compare our unfiltered lives to someone's filtered Instagram post. So
Yeah.
so yeah, there was this journey I had to go on, and where I really started to figure myself out was during that time where I went away and then even came back, and then I gave Thomas a chance, and I opened that door and it just flung wide open. Like he's the kind of person that um, will always allow me to be me completely. I never have to put up a facade or do something that I don't want to do because it's going to make him angry if I don't. Or it's a totally different kind of healthy relationship. And even in the beginning of that, like I had to train myself to think differently.
Like, what do you feel like was the biggest change for you then in your thought process, just about relationships?
About relationships, I would say that both people have to allow the other person to be themselves. Because as long as you're trying to change somebody, that person's never going to be their true self in front of you because they're always going to want to be this thing that you are shooting for them to be. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I mean, like Thomas. Thomas is a quiet person. He's very introverted. He doesn't like to go out. Um, he'll go out with friends. Me, even now, I could be out every night of the week if life allowed. Like I've literally had to consciously train myself to say, Chris, he really doesn't care if you go. Because in my previous relationship, like there's no way I would go out without my ex. If Thomas is quiet on a Monday morning and doesn't say two words to me, I can't automatically assume that he's in a terrible mood and hates me because Thomas is a quiet, introverted person. And I can't change that about him, nor do I want to. But those are things that I had to learn. Like, well, Chris, the same way that he allows you to be you, you have to accept that same thing about him. When I got to that point, that's when it was like, okay, game over. Like, I have someone who loves me and allows me to be my true authentic self and loves that person. Like, he will not let me do laundry because if I do laundry, he says I'm gonna mess something up, and he's OCD. So, so he doesn't let me do laundry. Um, we just have this dynamic where we celebrate each other's differences. And he gets along with my mom great, which is always a plus.
Yeah. Would you describe more about coming out to your parents?
Yeah, right after that relationship ended a couple of years back, my mom was diagnosed with cancer. And from the moment I came out to my mom, I was in this relationship that I never felt completely myself in. So she always equated me being disconnected from the family and all of that with me being gay. I always equated me being disconnected from my family with me being gay as well. I never connected it to I'm just in an unhealthy relationship and not loving myself or having my priorities right. It was a lot less about me being gay and a lot more about me just not being in a relationship that was conducive to being close to my family.
Mm-hmm.
So she was diagnosed with breast cancer, and that was like a 5 month stint where I was by her side every time she went to the doctor,
Hmm.
and we became super close after that. It was like my mom got her son back, and I got my mom back. When Thomas and I got together, her and Thomas fell in love with each other, and my whole family was at my wedding, uh,
Hmm.
which was a big deal. I will say this about coming out. For me, it took me 27 years to even say the words I'm gay. It took me another 5 years to believe that God still loved me
Hmm.
and that I could still love myself. So that's a 31-year journey of coming out. And many times people come out and they expect their families to instantly understand and be okay with everything. And I'm not giving permission for people to be abusive or emotionally neglect, their family that's gay, but there has to be an a level of understanding and patience, and you have to give people
Mm-hmm.
time to process things. And I have friends whose parents don't talk to them, and they try to hold them emotionally hostage. And in those situations, I say distance yourself to a degree to where they can't affect you emotionally, but leave that open door, because if it takes you years to come out, you have to give people a little bit of grace to have their own coming out process as well.
Mm. And sounds like you're saying don't hold on to resentment, like don't burden yourself with resentment,
Right.
like leave the door open for a relationship.
Yeah. I mean, that's where the boundary thing comes in. It's like you love people where they're at, but then you still have the boundaries that you have to set up for your own health and sanity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. So when did you and Thomas get married?
We got married May 6th, 5, 6, 17. Yeah.
Do you think that most of your guests have been to a gay wedding before?
I would say that half had never been to a gay wedding. It was funny because there were more straight people than gay people at our wedding, and I invited quite a few gay people, and it must have just been bad planning on their part. But there was like a lot of Thomas works for the sheriff's department here in
Mm-hmm.
town, and the Dallas County sheriff was here. Both of our best men were straight. Them and their wives were in the wedding. It was definitely an integrated bunch of people.
I don't know if this is too soon to ask this question, but do you and Thomas think you might want to have children someday?
We do think we do want to have children someday. That's definitely a conversation. Not now, but a little bit down the road. We've talked about adoption. We joke about it more than anything, but it's also a serious conversation. We joke about getting a kid that's already like halfway through school, so we don't have to worry about the
Yeah,
the
like a
potty training years.
teenager,
Right.
someone who's entering their freshman year, just like me.
Right. Exactly.
Well, I did want you to, I know you started to explain a bit about the two songs that you sent me, because I would like to
Yeah.
play them on this episode if possible. And I was wondering if you could
Yeah.
explain why you wrote Deadbolt and also why you wrote Don't Stay There.
I'll go to Don't Stay There first. So I had probably been at Cathedral of Hope for a year, the church that I work at, and I had been so, I guess, emotionally paralyzed that I really wouldn't do anything that was too risky as far as stuff that was beneficial to me, like writing music and doing stuff for myself, because I felt like whatever I did, it could be taken away at any time. Like
Hmm.
when my secret's found out, I'm going to lose everything. So I lived in this really safe little box. And so when I wrote Don't Stay There, it was after I had come out, but still and I'm in this relationship and I'm still trying to figure things out and still feel kind of paralyzed. And the words start off saying, you wake up in the morning stumbling, wondering how you're going to get up, saying, why me and how did I get this far from home? And then the chorus says, don't stay there because somebody needs to hear your sound. And when you speak, you can reach a broken heart. The more I sang that, the more empowered I started to feel. And I started singing it anytime I would perform. And then I decided I have to record this. I got in the studio and started working with the producer on it. And he's like, you don't even have a second verse. And I'm like, well, I never needed one. Like, the first verse is so good. Like, it speaks for itself. Like, I just sing it twice. And he's like, that's lazy. He's like, I know you have more to say in this song. So that's whenever I wrote the second verse that says, always trying to stay in the fast lane, doing what you can to run away from the war on the inside. And that's when it really came from here, like, for me, because I was literally like talking about what I had gone through over the last couple of years of just trying to pack it all away and not deal with it. So then get to the chorus that kind of comes down at the end, and he's like, so you're going to sing the same chorus again? I'm like, okay, chorus has never changed. Now, give me a break. So the music comes down, and he's like, say something different in this line right here. It's like, just something to really bring it home. And I was sitting there in the studio, and I'm like, your story's not ending. Your story's just starting. Your story is just starting. Don't cheat us out of the ending. And like that line, like, that line shifted the whole song, like, because it took on a new meaning that dealt with suicide a little bit. And, you know, your story is just now beginning. Like, don't cheat us out of the ending by not letting us see the rest of this beautiful life that you have to live. And so even now, like, I sing it every week at a bar with drunk people. And it's a really, like, emotional song. And every time I sing it, it just has a whole new meaning. And with our world climate, it's like every day you can sing it and relate it to something different.
I really like the line that says, you were made for more than this.
Yes.
There's like this line there where you say you were made for more than this. And for some reason, when I was listening to music today and I was letting it I told you, I was like, I'm letting your music wash over me. That line really spoke to me this morning.
So it's funny you say that. There's a lady that she's actually on my worship team now at church and sings with me. And during probably the roughest part of my singlehood after the breakup and all that, I was partying a lot and just like going on date after date after date. She started to notice a change in me, like not a good change. And like I seemed disconnected from work, and it's like I'm living my life for the first time, but not in a healthy way. And her and her wife took me to lunch and sat me down. And then one of the things she said was, if you could ever believe the words to your own song that say you were made for more, you'd be so much better off. She goes, I don't think you believe that about yourself, that you were made for more. And I was like, oh. So and it was still like 6 months later before I did my little Post-it exercise. So that song has a lot of meaning. And I wrote it in the same room where we got married. So it was meaningful.
I'll post a link to your video so people can see it. And awesome. What's the name of the bar that you sing at?
It's called Alexander's. So it's a little live music bar right on our little gay strip in Dallas. It doesn't hold a whole lot of people, but the owners invested quite a bit into making it a good space for music. And I've been doing that for, almost 2 years now. It's like my second church.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like. Sounds like you got a whole community there.
Yeah.
Like, it would be weird if you didn't show up
right
1 week. People would be like,
Well, like last week I switched nights, and so I had people texting me the next day like, we were here and didn't get the memo. I'm like, I put it out there.
Well, what about Deadbolt?
So Deadbolt was one of those where, I was talking about how I would have to make myself stay locked up in my house to like give myself that time. This one night I purposely like said I'm not going to go out tonight. And my ex had texted me. And at first the tune I was trying to say, I'm sleeping with the back door open tonight. And it had so much double meaning that I was like, there is no way. Like, because my initial thought was, I'm gonna sleep with the back door open, like in case you want to just come over one last time or whatever. And then I'm like, you know what? Hell no. I'm sleeping with the deadbolt locked. And somehow it worked even better than with the back door open. Then I start like writing the lyrics, and I will say the lyrics to that one were the toughest because I had so many lyrics compacted into these phrases. Josh Good, who produced Deadbolt and Don't Stay There, he helped craft so much of perfecting the lyric. Everything I had to say stayed the same, but some of the phrasing it changed because there was just too many words. My bridge was like, I could have rapped it. It was like, I changed the lock to my heart, your key wouldn't fit even if you tried. Like I had all these words in there, and so he's like, all right, take out that whole line, leave that line. It was just like splicing and dicing everything. So it really changed a lot from the original song. But I wrote it like all sad and like on the piano, like I was gonna, like it was gonna be a
like a ballad or something.
Yeah. It was totally a ballad, and then I'm like, this needs to be like upbeat, like it needs to be like Kelly Clarkson, like get your fist in the air. So that's what we turned it into, and then it became even more EDM than I originally imagined, and I loved it.
You guys are releasing that in this week, is that? Or
yeah, so it's already on iTunes. It's on iTunes and all those, anywhere you buy music, it's there. I recorded it a year ago, and I was like waiting for the right time to release it because I didn't feel comfortable with it after Don't Stay There, because Don't Stay There is so heart-wrenching and inspiring. And I'm like, how do I release the song about breaking up? First of all, right when I'm in a relationship and getting married, like it just doesn't seem like it makes sense. But now it makes total sense because it's like if I wouldn't have locked that deadbolt, I might not be where I am today.
Man, thank you so much for talking with me, Chris.
I didn't know I could talk for that long.
Was it okay for you? Were you?
No, it was great. It was great.
Okay.
I'm the kind of person, once I get going, like I'll just, spit it all out.
I can't play your game anymore. Hello, goodbye. Stuck in between the truth and lies. Sad excuses so paper thin. You're here, you're gone, and now it's just a breakup song. I loved you, but I lost myself and sent my dignity through hell. For me once on you, for me twice on me. It's time to bow out. Don't tell me that you're sorry. I'm sleeping with the dead boy locked tonight. Now that my feet are on the ground, you wanna come back around. You're knocking and I'm gonna hold this pillow tight. I'd rather be alone before you turn this heart to stone.
Thank you to Chris for openly and honestly sharing his story. You can find Chris singing on Wednesday nights at Alexander's Bar in Dallas. You can also follow Chris on Instagram at Chris Chism, CHISM. If you'd like to see the video for Don't Stay There, it's available on YouTube under Don't Stay There. And you can find Deadbolt on iTunes in the iTunes Store. As always, you can find links to all these, including Alexander's Bar and Cathedral of Hope Church, in the show notes, which you can find wherever you are currently listening to this episode. Lastly, to see photos of Chris and Thomas at their wedding under an umbrella of bubbles, as well as photos of Chris performing at Alexander's, go to my site, ColleenLindell.com. I'm really excited about this next episode coming out. I was fortunate in that I was looking for a third person to interview, and a friend recommended another friend to share his story. And this man is a former drag queen. I'm actually doing an interview with him tomorrow morning, and I'm really excited about it. Plus, there's going to be a bonus interview with youth advocate Katrina Plotz, who will explain everything having to do with gender and the current gender conversation. Thank you so much for listening. I'm so thankful for you. Please remember, when you're having a case of the Mondays perhaps, or the Wednesdays, or the Thursdays, whatever it is, that it's the trivial details of your life, it's the minutia of your life that makes your life interesting. This episode of Mostly Minutia was recorded in my living room in Glendale, California.
I'm gonna hold this pillow tight. I'd rather wake up in the morning stumbling. You wake up in the morning wondering how you're gonna get up. You wake up in the morning asking, why me and how did I get this far from home? You're looking at the glass half empty, those pessimistic eyes bowing to the lies. You just wanna lay back down. You say, wake me up when it's over. But don't stay there. Don't just lay there. Don't hide away in the background. Somebody needs to hear your sound when you speak. There is something that can reach a broken heart. So don't stay there. Always trying to stay in the fast lane, doing what you can to run away from the war on the inside. It's like you've been shot by yesterday, so numb, and now your heart is just a home for the pain. It's like you've been running on empty, and you're so paralyzed, plagued by your disguise. But lift your face off the ground. Who said your story was over? So don't stay there. Don't just lay there. Don't hide away in the background. Somebody needs to hear your sound when you speak. There is something that can reach a broken heart. It's time to get up and fight. It's time to start believing lies. You were made for more. You were made for more. You were made for more than this. 'Cause your story is just starting. Don't cheat us out of the ending. And when you speak, there is something that can reach a